Right, good afternoon and welcome to this session, and thanks for joining us. My name is Toit. I am a research associate at the Association for Water and Rural Development, otherwise known as AWARD, and I'm going to be talking today about systems approaches to capacity development, and I'm going to be using that within the context or case study of dam siltation management. Just like to acknowledge my team that I'm part of, and of course the work reported here is under the Dam Siltation Management Program funded by the Department of Water and Sanitation and managed by the Water Research Commission. So just to start off and introducing who we are, Association for Water and Rural Development is AWARD. We're a research-based non-profit organization. We focus on integrated water resources management and governance, and we operate in the Southern African context, although we do work more widely globally. These have been some of our partners over the years, and some of the work I'm going to share with you is going to be drawing on some of these programs that have occurred historically in our area. Right. We start off then with what is capacity development, and I think it's worth saying it's a concept that's not without its problems. It's changed over the years to be many different things, but one thing is clear is design processes require one to consider what aspects are one looking into. So just to put that up there, capacity development is often taken to mean training and individual capacity development, but for us we regard it more as creating an enabling environment, which includes more than just the individual. So there's some of the aspects I've included in this graphic. There could be technical and infrastructure capacity issues. There could be ability to change practices and adapt, something we call adaptive capacity in systems thinking. And then, of course, the traditional view of capacity development often used is one of skills development and training. I'll come back to that aspect specifically later. And then capacity can also involve what are called enablers. These are policies which enable something, tools, models, and so on, guidelines. These are all things that enhance capacity. And then lastly, communication, collaboration, networks. These actually assist with collective or collaborative capacity, where in a system you need to work with more than one component at a time. So we'll look at all of these, but just to keep an eye on the fact that capacity development isn't only skills development and training. So here's an example. This is the Palabora wastewater treatment works, an aerial shot. This particular plant is 12% operational. If you break that down, we see various components that are dysfunctional. And the point to make here is that no amount of training per se is going to remedy such a situation. There's going to be a need for capital injection. There's going to be a need for upgrades and the like. So the capacity of this plant will be enhanced, or can be, by training in terms of maintenance programs, but it probably is going to need another approach to capacity. Right, and so we're saying we need to move beyond awareness raising and training, and in the water sector, we need new models and approaches. And so hopefully I'll be able to introduce you to some of those in this short presentation. So first of all, we spoke about capacity, but then my title involves systems approaches. And what does that mean? So here's a picture giving you an idea of what systems thinking introduces to us in the water sector. Traditional thinking in the picture to the right is about linear approaches, cause and effect, moving from one point to another, where systems approaches mean one has to address many different things in a particular context and many different relationships between these components. And at the same time, you need to address things of complexity. So you see it's a complex situation. There's going to be uncertainty because of that complexity. There's going to be emergence, things going to emerge out of interactions that you might not be prepared for. Hence, you can end up getting surprises. Like the COVID situation has taught us, year and a half, no one would have thought that would have been where we've ended up today. it's a surprise. And have our systems been able to address that through management and preparation? So the elements of system thinking are designing systemically, systematic practices, how does one work with practices at a systems level, and then systemic action is how do we work collectively, because in a system we need to work out how the components can produce a better outcome. Something you can see at the small diagram at the bottom that's not unfortunately that clear, but it's not so much about the components A, B, C and so on, but it's about the relationships between those components that skills programs from a systems point of view need to focus. And sadly, those things are often ignored. Yeah, right. So choices for learning processes when you're trying to build capacity or skills from a systems point of view. They are there for training as well as for professional support. Of course, there's the old one of awareness raising within a system to just make people aware that there's a problem in a system and, you know, what should we do? There's a very specific approach called social learning. It's not just learning over a cup of tea. It's actually it's a process which is based on a very particular educational theory. I'll talk a little bit about that. Formal education is what people are very familiar with. People go off and get a formal degree, certificate, and so on through a school or an institute of higher learning, such as a university. And then, of course, workplace-based capacity development or training. It's professional support through workshops, various skills programs on the job, and continuous professional development point system. So that also exists. And then lastly, developing networks that really focus on working together collectively and collaboratively, working groups, task teams, and so on. These are all forms of learning. The first one, I'm not going to say much about it other than to say it's highly problematic in some respects unless it's linked to a transformative process where learning is involved. So, you know, when one looks at the Smoking Kills campaign, how effective that actually has been, some people say it's created subcultures where it's cool to adopt some of this iconography, and yeah, it has a reverse outcome. Water is Life, another campaign. Yes, once you understand water is life, well, what do you do about it when you don't have any? So there's issues there. Social learning, that's what I said I'd tell you a little bit more about. There is a distinct focus on change and transformation. It's not learning about a static system, it's focusing on how do you change systems. And it embraces knowledge as a socially situated process of making meaning. And largely that is done in a social setup. So it always starts out with understanding context so that you're addressing a real problem through various situation assessments, designing and plotting a path forward into the future, working towards it, evaluating that, and continuing as you go in an open-ended manner. What that leads to is, hopefully in the end, transformation. So that's how that works. And so things are not static. So it might engage or require change in practices as you go, and those practices then need to be redesigned as one moves along in a fairly coherent way. That leads to changes in meaning for a particular group, practitioners, stakeholders, what have you, and of course, in a nutshell, that is what social learning is all about. But it really does highlight the role of dialogue, not only science and scientific information, in formalizing knowing. So that is an important point. So here's an example from land use planning in Bapalaboa, a local municipality, where I think people will be familiar with these kind of learning situations, but they engage the learner and they start with what the learner knows. And then they look at institutionalizing that learning by adopting, by having this approach adopted within a particular institutional decision-making framework. I'll be talking a little bit about that shortly. And then again, social learning often requires practice change. This can be quite daunting. The question is, can it be done? And the answer is yes, if you approach it in a particular way. We recommend that it's best to start with what is easy to do and most effective, build up confidence and courage to tackle those things that are difficult to do and less effective in the red block in the bottom. Formal education, I'm certainly not going to dwell on this one because people are mostly familiar with the approach of developing qualifications, putting people on courses, giving them a degree, certificate, and so on. And then they go out into the world and supposedly are able to apply that knowledge. So it's an option as well. It can be used in traditional as well as systems and complex approaches. But the last one really that I'm going to dwell on, because it's the one we've adopted in the NETSILT program, is the workplace-based approach, which looks at occupations and it looks at skills programs within a particular occupational setting. And that's what NETSILT is trying to develop in the next 2 to 3 years. So just to say that there are models that can support this approach, there they are. I'm not going to dwell on them, but there is a substantial amount of work written about the different approaches that can support workplace-based learning and professional development. One important one is activity systems, and we will be adopting that in our program. You essentially start out with a particular practitioner, in this case a dam practitioner, and tries to move them along the red line to an objective, which is managing siltation or sedimentation. And then, of course, that should lead to an outcome, which is improved water security or dam functioning. And yeah, it's a systemic approach in the sense that it requires the integration of tools, rules, laws, the community, and a division of labor with other departments. So the system is held together by the activity that they've got to conduct. And as you see at the top, the sub-projects 1, 2, and 3 will be providing this approach with various tools and things that can assist in achieving the outcome. Okay, so that brings us to the point where I can introduce you to the NETSILT capacity development process that we've designed. And just to say that starts with the aim of having to enhance and improve the efficiency of dam siltation management through training and capacity development. So it explicitly recognizes the component of training and various other forms of capacity development. So we've adopted the qualifications approach to this, and that's simply people are familiar with. You develop the qualification, you register that to ensure quality with a national entity and make sure it's available on a national basis, and then you pilot the qualification. We also recognized the context of developing this particular program, and it was stated that dam siltation management is inherently complicated in South Africa, and there is a limited knowledge to make informed decisions. But we would add to that, there might also be limited skills and other capacity issues such as dam designs and so on. Right, in a nutshell, this puts the approach we've adopted up in a single graphic. We're dealing with a context. If we just follow the blue writing from the top down to the center, we're dealing with a context of stakeholders, land users. We're then looking at the dam siltation management skills that we can apply in this particular context. We also then move through to an enabling environment. What is there to help us? The legislation, the guidelines, the tools, the models, so that we can arrive at the center, which is the decision-making and management process. So the skills program is there to integrate all of that. So how does such a skills program going to look? Well, there's not one of them. We've designed 4. At the top, we have the most advanced one. It's an NQF level 8. It's the dam siltation manager. That skills program is going to be attached to the water infrastructure manager qualification registered under SAQA. So we're always attaching our skills programs to an existing qualification. The dam siltation technician, second one down, is a lower level at NQF, and that attaches to the industrial water process controller. And then the dam siltation controller at an NQF level 3, attached to water process control at a foundational level. And then we've introduced, for the purposes of dealing with complex and complexity issues, systems approaches. Because we're dealing with dams within a catchment, we need a networks and partnerships coordinator at an NQF level 5. And that person would then be working with the complex stakeholder and land user environment. Another design feature we're drawing on is the community of practice, a theory and a view which fits very well with systems approaches. It deals with stakeholders because we say dialogically meaning is made at that scale. So we have the key stakeholders at the top, which could all be all the stakeholders in the catchment, the land users, the land use activities. They will assist in the implementation. We have a communications network at the bottom right, which will help us develop a discourse, so to speak, through the media, through creating some sort of understanding of the importance of dam management. And then at the bottom, we have the community of expert practitioners who are really the experts and specialists who are going to help us develop the qualification through providing the quality of content and skills. Right, so essentially the community of expert practitioners, or CEP, helps us develop this schematic that I've put up there. Of course, the dam siltation management skills in red in the diagram are critical, but it also relies on integrating the legal literacy, strategies that are out there, local economic development opportunities and entrepreneurial possibilities, and so on. So this whole thing is a comprehensive view. So in conclusion then, we need to recognize that systems approaches see various things as important, but probably the most important is the view of learning, because without this, it's unlikely that we'll have a systemic approach or social learning approach materialize. So essentially what it says is a learner comes into a particular space, they know things from how they've been doing it historically for the last 10, 15 years. We're asking them to leave those things behind and adopt new processes and practices. So learning is critical. That space therefore has to be non-threatening. They also need to be motivated to be part of that learning process. It takes time, and they won't be engaging in just a product, which is a guideline on their table. They need a process to help them implement that guideline. So I'd like to end with this slide saying that learning is something that we must really explicitly address, irrespective of the approach we've adopted for the qualification or the skill program or whatever we're developing. Learning design back from there. So what's left for me to say is thank you very much, and you can read more about awards work at our website. Thank you.